In this video, what I want to do is talk about quarantine tanks. I want to go over some pros and cons to quarantine tanks, and I also want to solicit some information from you guys who have quarantine tanks or don't have quarantine tanks, and the reasons why you want or think we should have quarantine tanks, or the reasons you think we shouldn't have quarantine tanks. And there's arguments on both sides. Real quick, let's go over my quarantine tank. It's a 10-gallon tank with just the bare essentials. It's got a hang on the back filter in the back there, PVC piping just for the fish to be able to hide and be less stressed. No sand bed because we don't want any of the even the beneficial critters in there, because some of the treatments that we're going to be doing or potentially be doing in this tank are going to kill off those critters, whether they're beneficial or not. I have an ammonia badge here on the left. Some people hate those things. Honestly, I haven't had no problems with it. It's my first alert to let me know that ammonia is starting to climb in the tank and it's time to do an immediate water change. A magnet glass cleaner back there, and a heater, and a light, which is actually optional. Bare essentials, everything you see in here was probably about $130. Regarding the hang on the back filter, I decided to upgrade it and purchase myself a hang on the back filter from True Aqua. I was actually reading some comments off of Archangel 9008's one of his videos, and somebody brought this hang on the back filter up, and I checked it out and it seems pretty interesting, so I bought it. It's basically a hang on the back filter. It has 3 different functions. It filters the water, it skims the water surface, and also you can see right here it has a little UV sterilizer, which I thought was pretty cool and would benefit something like a quarantine tank when you're trying to kill off unwanted parasites. Got really good reviews. I got it shipped to my house for $53. You can see right now it's on sale at True Aqua. It's specific to nano tanks, and they also have if you have a nano tank, they have a whole bunch of cool pieces of equipment for nano tanks and the like. So I will do a video on this if it's worthwhile doing a video. If not, then I won't. So let's get back to the quarantine tank here, and let's go over some pros and cons to having a quarantine tank, some of the more common pros and cons. Let's go over some of the negatives. Some of the negatives to having a quarantine tank is you got to dish out some money up front to purchase all the equipment. Alright? And then like in my situation, it's a 24/7 quarantine tank, which means it's constantly running. It's gone through its cycle, and I have it constantly running. The heater's constantly on, the filter's constantly on, so I'm paying out more for electricity. You can run a emergency. What is going on in there? You can run an emergency quarantine tank where you just have a empty quarantine tank, and when you need it you fill it up with some display water from your display tank, and then just run it that way and stay on top of the ammonia spikes by doing water changes. It's argued that having a quarantine tank actually increases the stress of the fish, because the fish gets shipped to your local fish store, so that's one movement. It gets placed into a tank there, and then you buy it, it gets removed from that tank, placed in a bag, you bring it home, you acclimate it to yet another tank, which is your quarantine system, you leave it in there for a couple of weeks, and yet again we yank it out and put it in the display tank. All these movements, all these transfers from tank to tank to tank causes more stress to the fish, thus it loses its protective coating and is more susceptible to parasites. You're restricted to how many fish you can buy at one time, depending on your size of your quarantine tank. The ones I've seen most common are anywhere between 2.5 gallons and 10 gallons. Obviously, if you have a large aquarium and you're going to introduce large fish, you're going to have a much larger quarantine tank. But yet, you're still limited by the amount of fish you can buy at one time based on the size of your quarantine tank. Another system, another tank, means more work for you. You got to do more water changes because you're doing water changes in your display tank. Now you got to worry about your quarantine tank. you're testing your display tank. Now you got to start testing the water in a quarantine tank. If you start doing hyposalinity, it is highly recommended to get something like an auto top off to maintain that water level so that it doesn't drop and salinity starts increasing. So yet another expense. And lastly, another negative is if you dose your system with copper, dose your quarantine system with copper, basically anything that touches this quarantine system has to be isolated to just this system alone, meaning you can't mix and match pumps or heaters or filters with your display tank and your quarantine tank, and it leaves room for accidents. If your quarantine tank is dosed with copper and you accidentally transfer something that's contaminated with copper into your display tank, now you're going to have a whole huge issue in your display tank. So likely to be prone to accidental exposure of copper in your display tank is another negative. Let's go over some of the pros. I went to the local fish store. I bumped into my buddy Mark. True story. Mark has a 250-gallon system. I didn't know this at the time, but he showed me some pictures later. He has a 250-gallon system dominated by angelfish and no corals, just live rock. Some of the fish he has in there cost $800 each. So this guy buku bucks on his fish. Okay, thousands of dollars worth of fish in his system. He did not run a quarantine tank. He purchased a wrasse from online somewhere, put it in the tank, started showing signs of ick. Before you knew it, the whole system had ick, and every single one of his fish died, for the exception of one goby. True story. I could tell you that Mark wishes he had a quarantine system. Earlier I said it costs more money as a negative. Well, a positive is it can save you money. So in Mark's case, had he quarantined that wrasse, he would have saved himself thousands of dollars of loss from his fish, because that wrasse would have never made it into the display tank because it would have started showing signs of ick in his quarantine tank. Another benefit for the quarantine tank is being able to medicate sick fish. A lot of the medications that are used to medicate sick fish cannot be used in a reef tank. It'll kill off your reef, kill off your inverts, and it can do harm to other types of fish because some fish are more sensitive to these types of treatments than others. The other positive is you already have your fish in a quarantine system, so if it does get sick, boom, you have them right here, you treat them accordingly, and it saves you from the fuss of having to try to break down your entire tank, because that's what you basically have to do with most of these fish, is break down your tank, catch that sick fish, and then throw them into a quarantine tank, provided that you even have a quarantine tank. Alright guys, those were some of the pros and cons to having a quarantine system. My recommendation personally is go with the quarantine system. At least have one on hand. If you don't want to run it 24/7 like I do, then have an empty one ready to go in the event that you need it, or in the event that you're going to introduce a new fish into your system. I would recommend you place them in a quarantine first. Please post down below, guys, if you have an opinion on whether to have one or not to run one at all. We'd love to hear from you. There is no real wrong answer here. It's based on your experience. Just I like to share that experience with everybody that's visiting my channel. These videos are done specifically for the people that are getting into the hobby, or people that are in the hobby and are new to it, like myself. And I really heavily rely on the more experienced reefers that are out there to provide us with some feedback and guidance so that we could be steered in the right direction. These videos are here to facilitate some good conversation down below. I hope you guys got something out of these videos. Please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.